Welcome to Torah Smash, the podcast for nerdy Jews, where our lives of Jewish learning collide with our love of nerd culture. In each episode, we discuss what we lovingly call a Torah Smash, which we have defined as a beautiful collision of one thing from the world of Judaism with another from nerd culture. I'm Ethan Lane Miller, and joining me today are
Barack Malkin,
RDY.
I am looking forward to this conversation. As Barack knows, it kind of fully came together a couple hours before we recorded. I've been kicking around a couple of ideas, and I can already hear Barack at the end of this being like, oh, yep, this was an Ethan episode for sure. I'm really excited to jump into this. And so I want to start by giving the kind of Cliff Notes version of two stories from the Torah that are the Jewish kind of anchor that I want to explore. And I want to start with Jacob and Esau. So Jacob and Esau are the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. And their story goes that they have been competing since birth. And in fact, pre-birth. The story goes that Esau was born first, and Jacob came out immediately afterwards holding on to his heel as if he was trying to climb over him or pull him back in so that Jacob could be born first. So the most famous story, or at least one of the most famous stories, comes with the story of how Isaac was tricked into giving Jacob the birthright blessing. So RDY, I've tried to do some research on this. How old were Jacob and Esau when this blessing took place?
It's unclear, which is why probably your research came out fruitless.
Well, one of the research things that came out was said that Jacob and Esau were 77, while Isaac was 137. But
numbers are not math in the Torah, in rabbinic parlance. It means if it says 77, it means old, and 137 means older or really old.
See, my interpretation is always that Jacob and Esau were kids at this point.
Yeah, I sort of assumed either teens or early 20s.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. That's what I always envisioned. Yeah.
It reads like teens or tweens because they're not yet married. They're still living in their parents' house. So they have to be younger than marriage age, which could be arguably anywhere from 13 to 30.
Okay. So there's, as I said, the story that Jacob tricked his dad into receiving the blessing, leads to some, we'll say, difficult feelings between Jacob and his brother Esau. They eventually reconcile years later. So second story, coincidentally, is Joseph. Happens to be essentially Jacob's favorite child. And he knows it and antagonizes his brothers about it. So what I read essentially came down to he was kind of a tattletale on his brothers. He'd see things going on in the field and report them in, which does not ingratiate himself to them. Joseph was famous for dream interpretation, and on at least one occasion, he interpreted a dream that he saw when he was little to interpret that he was going to rule over his family, which, again, his brothers didn't appreciate. So one day, when Joseph was about 17 years old, they ambushed him and threw him into a pit. And that's eventually what led to the story of Joseph ending up in Egypt and interpreting dreams, and eventually the family comes back around. But these are the two stories, the two Jewish stories that I want to anchor this discussion about. I see the wheels turning on Barack's face right now.
Yeah, I'm nervous because I have two thoughts in my head. One of them I hope is not the topic because I
hope if it is, this is bad.
I want to wait until I'm able to rewatch it. So first, I'm going to say the one that I know it's not, which I would love to do. You talked about generational stories and how they sort of reflect each other. I would love to do an episode on the TV show This Is Us. It's not This Is Us.
Oh, it's not.
Great show. I would love to do that too.
Yeah.
I'm not watching the whole series again, but
yeah. I'll let RDY do a guess before I get upset that it's the other one.
It's funny because I also had an anti-guess, and it was
oh no.
Yeah. And
what's your anti-guess?
The anti-guess is Brothers and Sisters, another great TV series.
Oh.
I'm just kind of stuck on the relationships of siblings in the Torah and how it rarely bodes well among siblings and how things, how they treat each other, how they trick each other, how they're always in competition for a birthright, for an inheritance, and what have you. That's all I got.
You're not cold, but take like a step out. Take a higher level view.
Oh, yay. It's not going to be my other guess. Good. It is an Ethan episode. Okay, so it's not my other guess was Agatha all along. And I'm not ready to do an episode on that because of the twin thing and because of the birthright thing. And
I have so many possibilities for Agatha all along. It's not this one.
Yeah, listeners, stay tuned. I'm sure we'll do that in a couple episodes.
I had a feeling that you were guessing Agatha all along because of the way you set it up.
Yeah.
Think bigger.
Can I give you a hint?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's about a trope or type of story that pops up.
Like the Parent Trap type story?
Not so much.
Is it trickery?
No.
Relationships among siblings is not a far enough step back. Is it relationships among families?
You're still close. You're not
Still
quite
close.
there.
It's relationships between different groups of people.
Not quite.
I give up. I think just give it to us.
I want to explore stories in Judaism and in nerddom where a child is the central character.
Ooh.
Oh, okay.
So as I was thinking through this episode, I realized that there are a lot of ways in which this takes place in nerddom. There are things where children are the literal focus, thinking about Stranger Things, Buffy, X-Men. We see it in video games with Cal Kestis and Jedi Fallen Order and Aloy and Horizon Zero Dawn. There's stories where children are key to the plot. I thought of River from Firefly. There's stories where they are important supporting characters to the plot. And of course, it's me. So I think of Star Trek. You have Wesley Crusher, Jake Sisko, Naomi Wildman, the Borg children. And for the sake of this conversation, I do want to separate out media that is specifically created and the target audience is children. So I'm thinking like excluding some of our beloved Saturday morning cartoons, but that are geared towards children. So I really want to think about like nerddom properties that are geared toward adults that happen to feature children as a key element to it.
Jurassic Park.
I'd buy that.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yes.
Ooh.
Although
The Goonies.
see, and I think we can also debate some of it too. I mean, one of the big debates that I think could be worth having is Star Wars really a children's show and adults happen to like it, or is it vice versa?
I mean, we just did a Real Judaism on Rogue One, and that, I mean, it could be very easily argued that Jin is a child in that movie.
She's quite young, yes. Also, Cassian is too.
Can you expand a little bit more on what we're looking for here?
Yeah, really, like my big question is, why do we as adults continually gravitate to stories where children are the central characters, where we see this in the Torah? Like there were the two stories I mentioned. I think there are plenty of others we can pull from. We have these stories in nerddom. Why?
I think so. There was a point in the 80s. I know that child actors started a lot earlier, right? Black and white films had a lot of children-centric films, but they were also had a main adult person, right? In the 80s, I really think, maybe late 70s, movies started having child-centered films as a way to market to them to, urge the parents, because the kids are screaming they want to go to see the movie again. So parents, you're going to have to take them.
Baseball's the flamethrower. The kids love themselves.
Right. And so I think there's a lot of children-centric movies in the 80s, which is why Stranger Things has the children-centric cast, mimicking that time frame of Goonies, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Little Giants, The Sandlot. Like there's a lot of kid-centric films in that area, 80s and 90s, where like that's the focus because they were opening up to a new audience that they hadn't thought of attracting before on such a scale.
So for you, you see it as they're playing to multiple audiences.
They're playing to one audience that will then shout to the other audience, buy me this thing and go take me to this movie.
Interesting.
I totally agree. And part of the reason I think people our age are so into movies is because we got into them when we were much younger, and why they play such an important part in our lives and the way we talk and the way we understand the world through the lens of viewing movies is because they had characters with whom we could relate. And the younger we were, the younger the characters needed to be for us to relate to them.
Can you say a little more about that?
Well, in my head, I was thinking about Superman. And in the movie, we see Superman, the 1970s movie, we see Superman from infant to adult. So no matter where you are on that journey, you have little bits of amazement at his feats as a young child, as a teenager, and then becoming an adult. And like the learning to hide who he really is clearly a matter of what his experiences were as a child. And then take that a step further into the Smallville property from a couple of decades ago, where we're watching Clark Kent experience high school, and as he hits puberty, his abilities start to develop, which is kind of an X-Men way of looking at it, but still the idea that he's developing as a teenager. Again, we're like roped in and having this relation to young people. And no matter how old we are, we were young once. So we can relate, more of the audience can relate to the younger characters than can relate to elder characters.
I think that's a very, very interesting perspective. Do you have a favorite story, Jewish and nerd, where a child or young person is center stage?
Gosh, I've got to open up my movie app.
Do you want to just say Jonah now, Brock?
Oh, as a Jewish story? That's a good point. You know what? I don't know why I like the Jonah story so much. It may be because for many years working as a youth advisor, I recreated that as a live action improv style retelling for the High Holiday service. And I would bring a laundry basket, which would play it was one of the characters essentially throughout the sketch, where first the laundry basket was the ship. I would put one of the kids from the audience as Jonah into the laundry basket, and I would drag the kid through the aisles on the ship, and it would get
Did the
rocky.
kid know what they were signing up for before they got into this?
Eventually, yeah, they would all volunteer the following years because they wanted to be Jonah. And so the ship would get rocky, and I would toss them around in the basket a little bit, and then they would get swallowed by the whale. So they'd get tucked down, and I would put the basket on top of them. And so the basket now became the whale, and then they would go sit underneath the tree. So then I would put the basket propped up on the side, and they would sit sort of in it with the shade of the basket as the tree. And so I think I enjoy the Jonah story because I got to play with it so much for so many years. But yeah, I'll say the Jonah story. You know what? I'm having an issue with this because as I think of like stories with child-centered characters, a lot of them are problematic that probably don't hold up still, right? Richie Rich, Blank Check. I may say Home Alone is a fantastic film centered on a child. We talked about it a little bit in our last movie of why it's also technically a Hanukkah movie. So go back and check out that episode. But I'll have to think some more about other favorite child-centered films.
What about like Wreck-It Ralph, where it's a bit of a buddy cop movie, but one character is meant to be childish, whereas one character is meant to be adultish?
I think that doesn't fall into the same category because Wreck-It Ralph is an adult character. That
I would also say that Home Alone, I could argue who the target audience is, and Wreck-It Ralph, I think, is definitely more of like a kids movie. Because I almost wonder if there's two categories. There's media for all ages that features a child, or a children's film that adults can also get something out of. And these are very different types of films, but like Wreck-It Ralph, Inside Out, Shrek, adults can get things on different levels in those movies than kids do.
Yeah. A big one for me growing up was E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Oh, that's a good one. Similarly, RDY, I was thinking of Super 8.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that was, see, that was while I was like college age, maybe. So I maybe saw it once.
It came out when I was in college, RDY. I don't think so.
Oh, okay. So let me correct that. So it came out when I was maybe like in grad school. So I might not have watched it as intently.
Yeah. I know there's some, debate and discussion about it, but I would consider Esther to be young adult, very like older teens, at least in her story.
And the story is definitely a YA novel.
Yes. Oh, that's a whole nother genre that's an interesting thing to think about there too.
One of the movies that my wife absolutely loves is Wonder
I
with
haven't
the
seen it yet. It's supposed to be very
so
good.
yeah, it's a great movie, and they're coming out with a sequel, or they just came out with a sequel where one of the bullies in Wonder turns out to be the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. And she tells him her story so that he can learn how important it is to have that kindness that he was lacking when it came to his treatment of the boy in Wonder. So, not related to the boy Wonder. So that's a movie that I'm looking forward to seeing that I know is going to be child centric in two different generations.
Where do we think the movie with Robin Williams, Jack, falls on this category?
Oh, great pull.
Right? He's not a child person, but his character is a child who is just aged rapidly.
I think that's your answer. His character is a child.
I
And
also agree that the answer was in the question.
yeah. And as he progressed through school, all of the classmates, play an important role in the movie. That's a
Yeah.
fun movie.
Yeah.
So
That's a good question. So many good stuff in the 80s and 90s that I'm struggling to like. There's a lot of like those, again, Robin Williams in like Jumanji is a child-minded person as an adult character, but I wouldn't say
Yeah.
I don't think that falls under this.
No, both Jumanji movies, I think, absolutely fall into this category because it's adult actors playing children, and by that same logic, Big
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
with Tom
Yeah.
Hanks, oh, super fun.
Yeah.
Jumanji. Yeah, absolutely. So from a literary or storytelling and in terms of the Torah, from a perspective of imparting the message of telling the story, you know, are there things that having children in these stories, does that change the message? Does it change the way we interpret stories at all?
I'm going to go back to it changes how relatable it is to us. And when we can relate to it, we can pull meaning from it. This is why we turn the Torah again and again, in the words of Rabbi Ben Bagbag, that we don't expect the stories to change when we read them from year to year, but we understand that we change from year to year. And so when we read the same stories with a different perspective, with another year under our belts, then we find new things. And if we're lucky, we find something new every year. And they certainly hit differently every year. I was talking with my eldest just before this recording, and they were telling me about a line in a show that during rehearsals never got that big of a laugh from the cast and anyone who was watching. But since the first performance was the day after the election, that line hit so differently because as a community, they had a different experience.
What was the line, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't remember.
Oh no.
It was something about reaping what you sow, but I don't remember exactly the line.
Um, one of the things I've been considering from the nerd centric side of things is, when things take place to characters who are children, I think our reaction can be slightly different. When I go back to think of River from Firefly, ethically speaking, I should be just as upset if this person who was experimented upon and psychologically tortured and broken, I shouldn't care how old they are. I should be upset anyway. But it feels like it hits differently knowing that this is a child who this was being done to.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think there's a lot of times characters are given certain ages, genders, backgrounds based on how the writer director wants us to feel about that person, because it's a lot easier to be sympathetic. But I don't think it's a lot easier. I think they think it's a lot easier, but I think there's a wide range of examples in today's world where just good writers and good directors can make you feel empathy for any character by setting them up properly, right? So I think just having a child actor can be easier when they are hurt for the audience to feel sympathetic for them than it might be if that same story happened with a grown adult for whatever reason.
It's higher stakes.
Yeah, right. Their whole life is ahead of them, and now this traumatic experience is going to shape them, whereas the adult can brush it off because they are an adult, hopefully.
Maybe. Yeah. So funny that they don't give a lot of credence to that in the Harry Potter novels and movies.
Mhm.
That these are children that they're putting in such grave danger.
Right.
Harry Potter is such an interesting example, RDY, because it definitely starts as like a child YA novel. And what was interesting is someone who was like in the zone of who these books were aimed for when it came out. It definitely feels like the books grew with me. And by the end of it, it was a pretty dark and complex story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what number of book was The Goblet of Fire where there was the first child death?
Was it 4?
Four.
So in the fourth book out of 7, there's a child death. So that's so heavy. And I don't think I was in the headspace when I read The Goblet of Fire to realize how heavy it was, because I was so enchanted by the story and I was moved and I cried, but I wasn't like traumatized the way I should have been with a child dying in a children's book.
Yeah. I wonder if that's also why there was a shift in horror movies. And there's a lot of horror movies with children as the main characters, because you get a lot more sympathy that they're going through this as opposed to some adult who'd like, right, the Omen or I think the Chucky series involves a lot of kids at some like.
I don't know about the Chucky series, but Gremlins, the new Ghostbusters.
I have not seen it. I'm curious if y'all have, but like the horror movie Megan involves a
Right.
murder robot that is a kind of a child, right?
Right.
Totally. Murder robot who's a child who attacks a child.
Yeah, I have not seen it. But I think
my
it
advice
falls
about Megan, if you have not seen it, my advice is don't.
I think, but it falls under that same category of it's looking to get some different emotions out of you, which is why either protagonists or antagonists in horror movies there's a lot of them that are children, because it helps to invoke this innate want for their care and their well-being.
And I mean, thinking very archetypally, like evoking a sense of innocence.
And also the era of movies that was like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer and all of those movies, even Bodies, 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 or whatever that terrible movie was a couple years ago. That I know it was too many bodies. These are actors playing teenagers, which are still children. So, the high school kids that are in Scream, they're the adults of the movie, and they don't seem that much younger than Courtney Cox, who's the mature one, but they're children.
I
The murderer.
really have been wanting to throw into this list Spider-Man
Oh
as
yeah, great.
right, because the whole argument for why Stanley wasn't going to be allowed to have him as a superhero because he's a child and superheroes are adults, children are sidekicks, and so his whole background of a character is that he's a child, and so he's
Right.
dealing with stuff on a very different level than all of the other superheroes are. And it's not until his story gets woven out and developed that we see him in college and post college, but his original version and a lot of the stuff we see is him as a high school kid dealing with all the stuff. So I would throw Spider-Man to this mix.
I love it. And Into the Spider-Verse does a lot of fun playing back into that high school world with like the original comics high school world, with the parallels with Miles Morales reading the comic book as he's experiencing what Peter Parker experienced in the comic book. So much fun.
Yeah.
I just thought of also like two films that feature actors who are supposed to be children, it could not be farther from being a kids movie. Superbad and Booksmart.
Oh
Those-
yeah.
Yeah, but those
Yeah.
are both on the tail end of graduating high school, aren't they?
Yeah, still kids. Like they're
Children.
pre-college.
College kids are still kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story.
I probably will have that mindset when my kids are that age, but right now, graduating high schoolers and college kids, in my head, I lean more towards the adult side.
Yeah, they lean more towards it, but their brains aren't fully developed until what,
Sure.
25, something
Yeah.
like that.
26.
26.
Learned that
What
from
about, what
Dr.
about some of the
Betsy Smith.
newer cartoons like Moana and Encanto?
So that's so interesting because, and again, I am the baby of this group. And also, I feel like for me, it might have been because of how old I was, but like when Shrek came out, it felt like for me, there was a little bit of a shift. Maybe it was my own aging as well. But like I started realizing, like, oh, as an adult, there are also things I can get out of these sorts of movies too. And I think some of it is these very good movies have gotten smarter and better at putting in things for adults that adults can appreciate and take from it.
Sesame Street was amazing at putting in things for adults, but that was less of, I think, what you're talking about. That was more like kid-focused movie and
Yeah.
TV show with a couple of things to keep the adults entertained versus
I know this was an episode, but I'll also plug Bluey. Every time I watch that, I'm like, this is so good.
They're so good.
Never
Oh
watched
my
it.
God.
So I want to also pull us back to the Torah and the Jewish aspect of it a little bit. You know, we got Jacob and Esau and Joseph, and I talked a bit about Esther, and we kind of went ahead and put Jonah in there as well. You know, we just talked earlier about how there's a wide breadth of age range when it comes to Torah stories, from Isaac at the ripe age of 137 to debates on how old was Queen Esther in her story.
Yeah, and debates on how old was Isaac when Abraham tried to sacrifice him, and how old were Abraham and Sarah when they actually had children. Now it says specifically how old they were, but again, numbers aren't math.
I don't know how old the daughters of Zelophehad are because they all are unmarried. And so in the Bible, it makes you think that they are on the younger, like in their 20s,
Yeah,
sort of.
they feel young. Yeah.
Right.
And they're old enough to speak up for themselves, or at least for one of them to speak up for the
Right.
quintet, and yet young enough that they're not married, and that their father died of presumably old age, like died for reasons that are not described, but he doesn't die in battle or because he was punished.
So
technically, the early beginning story of Moses is also a children's story.
Yeah, I already said Superman.
Right.
if you were going to replace an adult character with a child, everything in the story stays the same, but they happen to be a kid, who would you replace?
Torah or pop culture?
Either.
This is a much harder question than when you asked me to replace a movie character with a Muppet.
Yeah.
It's the same question. He's slightly changed.
A story where there's an adult and we replace that adult with a kid.
I would love and they beginning of the third movie did this and it was wonderful. So give me a child-focused Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
I think, and there's a lot of like kids spy movies and stuff, but I think the archaeological mystical artifact piece would be wonderful for the eyes of wonder of a child and the belief and the imagination that they may have of what could be. I would love that. Does that exist? Do they not have like a children's artifact? The Dora the Explorer movie
there was a series called Young Indiana Jones.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't seen it. It's on my list, but I think Dora the Explorer is the only one I can think of that has that.
And Shades of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego.
It's an adult.
Sure. But
yeah, that's what Shades. It's not a perfect one. But
the Goonies,
a series aimed for kids.
I keep saying Goonies.
It already has kids. Oh, but
right. It's an art. They're searching for an artifact. Yeah. It happens to be a huge.
That's true.
But
Indiana Jones always deals a little bit with the supernatural, which Goonies does not have. Goonies is a very like grounded story, and there's actual mechanisms. There's no spirits. There's no weird stuff going on. It's a pure treasure hunt, pure pirate story. I'm talking like mystical artifact with some weird stuff going on.
If I were to create a live action adaptation of something from the Torah, I would have God played by a child.
Oh, I like that.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
I still submit, and I've said many, many times to many, many people that my favorite casting of God was in The Prince of Egypt, where Moses was played by Val Kilmer and God was played by Val Kilmer, because it makes sense to me that a person would hear God speak to them in their own voice.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's good.
In the early stories of Jeremiah, he is a child responding to God, and he has all these moments of confusion, and like he wakes up and he says to his dad, there's this weird voice in my head while I'm trying to go to sleep, and his dad's like, go back to sleep and listen to the voice, for goodness sake.
Mhm.
So there are elements of the Jeremiah story that already have him as a child. It might be fun to play out if he stayed a child the whole way. It would be a very, I don't know, mature child because he gets access to the royal court. But I think that could be fun.
I was going to say, give me like any of the big superheroes as kids, but they're doing that now with the Young Avengers, right? Like Iron Man is going to have it with Ironheart's going to have sort of a child version, and
Yeah.
Hawkeye's got a child. They all sort of have a
And they've
child
done it
version now.
already.
Yeah, now they're
Teen
doing it. So
Titans, and they've
yeah,
done. It could even be argued that the Thunderbolts they look pretty young.
that's true. This is probably getting cut, but a younger version, it's probably super bad. A younger version of 40-year-old virgin.
I do think that's super bad.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that is super bad.
Yeah, it pretty much is super bad. So never mind.
So before we wrap up, as I was assembling these two stories from the Torah, I just got to ask, how would Jacob, after having grown up and seeing the damage of a sibling rivalry, why would he have a favorite child and make it so obvious?
We always we always do this. This is human nature. We carry the sins of our parents. We become them whether we want to or not. We fight with them all through growing up. We argue, we say, I'm never going to be like you. I hate you. And then we become them. I cannot tell you how many times I hear my father's voice coming out of my mouth, or look up in the mirror and go, oh my God, why is my father here? And it is such human nature that I think that is exactly why it happens in the Torah.
I have to ask some clarifying questions because I don't know all the details of these. So, is Joseph the youngest?
At the time, yes, but eventually, no.
Okay. So, my guess, you're saying, how does he make this mistake? He was the youngest and not respected or treated well, right? And so, I bet he was trying to avoid that by making sure that the youngest got appreciation and love that he did not. Therefore, following in the same tropes of creating a favorite by accident because he was trying to avoid creating a favorite.
Overcorrected.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
overcorrected of making sure the youngest felt the love that he did not.
I mean, it definitely says that that in the Torah that Joseph is favored. He gives him a multicolored coat. One of the things, though, that's a little more subtle in the Joseph story is, Ethan, you described that Joseph had a dream where his family would be subservient to him. He doesn't say to his family the interpretation of his dream. All he did was tell them what the dream was. So Joseph is this amazing dream interpreter, but he goes to his family and he says, oh, I had this dream and I was the sun and the moon and the planets were bowing down to me, or something like that. And his family says, what are you saying? We're all going to bow down to you? Like, they don't need him to interpret it for him because they are a family who can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he gets into the Pharaoh's court via jail, he knows how to do this thing, which is amazing to Pharaoh, but no big deal to the Jacobsons. So he's not that special compared to all the other kids, but he is the favorite, not because of what he can do or who he is or where he was in the birth order, but who his mother was. He was Rachel's baby, and Rachel was the beloved wife.
Great. All right, y'all. This has been my episode. Before we go, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, we didn't mention any Roald Dahl stuff. We didn't mention Willy Wonka. We didn't mention Matilda. We didn't mention Giants
Yeah.
Peach, like all of his stories, BFG, they're all child centered, and he's an anti-Semite, so we can move on.
There's a lot. We missed a lot. Please share with us some of the favorite
so much.
kids movies that you have, because there's so much good content out there. And I think we are trying to restrict ourselves by making sure that it is a child focused and not just has a child that's also a main character, right? Like Up isn't a kids movie. Like there's a character, one of the main characters is a child, but I wouldn't count Up in this category, right? So please try to also limit yourselves and make sure you're following our rules. But there's so much.
Sure.
There's so
Just
much.
love to hear from you.
Yeah, that's fine too. Yeah.
We didn't mention any Charlie Brown properties either.
Yeah.
Good call.
Peanuts properties.
Yeah, so much good stuff. We missed a whole lot. I'm sure we did.
Yeah.
There's too much to not miss.
Yeah.
This was great. Thanks, y'all. I hope
Yeah,
that we
thank you.
all continue to read, enjoy, partake in our nerd fandoms, and deepen our love of Judaism with eyes wide open and childlike wonder.
And I also, before we leave, this is the last episode airing before Hanukkah starts this year. So happy Hanukkah, everybody.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Brock, is this the last one of 2024?
This is. Yeah, well, I guess we'll see you all next year.
Yeah.
That's
See
crazy.
you next year.
Oh, so great, y'all.
It's been a great year with you both. Thank
It's
you.
been, y'all, just this podcast has given me so much in this year. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you, listeners.
It's
Yeah,
good.
big happy new year to our listeners, and happy Hanukkah, and may you find that you are making the miracles that you want and need in this world.
And hey, Jason, Merry Christmas, buddy.
That'll do it for this episode of Torah Smash. Our fiscal sponsor is Jewish Creativity International. Our theme music was created by Sean Fogel. You can check out Sean's bands and studio work at www.thesleepywest.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find us and is an excellent way to support the podcast. We want to hear from you and continue today's nerdy discussion. Go to torahsmash.com to find where to connect with us online, purchase swag from our store, support us with a donation, find previous episodes, and more. And, say it with me, Happy Hanukkah, do 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 do. Hanukkah, do 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 do. Hanukkah, do 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 do.
Do you remember that TV show Small Wonder?
Mm-mm.
Oh God, okay.
Too old.
Yeah, I am.
And that very well may be a post credit. That worked very nicely for the conversation.
You
You guys remember Small Wonder? You're too old.
Wait, family podcast.
Yeah, I know that whole section's not making it in. I know.
It's like Sheryl Crow. There's a picture of Sheryl Crow, and then Sheryl Murder, and there's like 12 pictures of Sheryl Crow.
Oh, that's good.
Dude, potty mouth today.